Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting in just about 1 minute, so please bear with us. Thank you. So I think we'll get started. And first of all, I'd like to say, well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the economic benefits as well as other considerations as organizations are moving their disaster recovery to the cloud. And so what I'd like to do is, first of all, introduce myself. I'm Caroline Seymour, and I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing here at Zerto. And I'm delighted to have with me two experts. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Enrico Signoretti, who is the Research Analyst from Gigaom. So welcome, Enrico.
Hi, Caroline. Welcome to everybody.
Yes, and we also have Steve Blow, who is our technical evangelist here at Zerto. So welcome, Steve.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you both very much for being with us. And Enrico and Steve are going to be sharing their insights as we explore these topics today. So we want to look at three key areas that we see and hear from IT leaders. And these are sort of key thoughts around, first of all, is cloud-based disaster recovery feasible for my organization? And where perhaps should I start? The second key section that I want to cover is about how does cloud-based DR recovery save money from an FTE perspective, maybe infrastructure costs and so forth. And then also look at what different options are available to us. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll talk about the steps that need to be taken sort of to learn more, as well as also to convince others in perhaps your organization that move to cloud is the right decision to actually make. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, sort of focus on the first section around is cloud-based DR feasible for my organization? And so the first question that I would like to pose to Enrico and as well as also to Steve is the fact that we've seen a number of organizations that have been turning, I should say, disaster recovery in the cloud. And we see a steady rise of that. Perhaps if you could give us your input and your insight around what is driving cloud adoption as an industry trend.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start here by saying that by 2023, at least 50% of the commodity server workloads still hosted in the data center will be use cloud for disaster recovery. Okay, this is actually a general trend, so it's not just for disaster recovery. But the advantage for disaster recovery is that we're moving to the cloud because there are a lot of benefits. Okay, it can take advantage of the flexibility. So no matter how your on-premises infrastructure changes over time, so you can take advantage of the quick changes that you can make on the cloud as well. And of course there is agility because you can do many more tests of your environment, so you can smooth the process. You can start in minutes instead of hours, sometimes days, a full environment to if there is something that changes that you need to test it. So there is no pre-existing infrastructure in the cloud, and there is a cost benefit, of course, because you pay for what you actually consume. So usually all the storage is pre-allocated, and you start your virtual machines when they are actually necessary for the testing or even for an actual disaster. So it's very convenient at the end of the day for several reasons.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. recent trend we've seen with digital transformation across the industry, where more and more businesses and organizations are putting their services online, is refocusing availability. Services are available much more, 24/7 now, and so any downtime is significant. When you pair that with, the data growth piece that Enrico mentioned, which fits really well in the cloud, but also security and ransomware and things like that. That's another driver. How do I get my environment back up and running as quickly as possible in the event of, an attack from that side of things? Another consideration. But also, there's a lot of organizations out there that have very, very large IT teams that are focused on keeping the lights on. But the focus of the organization probably is far reach from IT itself. They could be doing anything. And they don't really want to be running data centers. And this is a perfect reason to obviously refocus your IT staff on innovation and things like that. Obviously, another key thing that's happened recently is COVID and the impact of everyone working from home and that remote working, and how do we deliver that? And when you've got physical data centers, is it set up to allow that access and things like that? You can move much quicker from a cloud perspective, and that's, I guess, another driver there. And as I said, that innovation that you can drive from that approach is really key.
Thank you. So that looks at sort of where the adoption of cloud, and maybe what we should do is the next question I have around this is sort of what is perhaps some of the key signs an IT leader should be looking for in their organization when they're actually considering cloud-based DR.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a CIO looking at cloud-based DR, what would I be looking for in my business? Obviously, data growth. Myself and Enrico both mentioned that. That's a key one. Adding hardware is a slow process. Being able to just spin up more resource in the cloud is much quicker and much more efficient. Switching from a capex model, again, typically aligned with traditional hardware purchases, to an OpEx model that the cloud services are very good at delivering is another big win from that side of things. So if you're looking at that, that's a key metric as to why you might want to start considering cloud. Obviously, digital transformation, things being on all of the time, etc. What's the management around that? Do you have the IT staff to manage that? Those are all key aspects, along with obviously this cost savings that you can have if you've got a limited budget, but you need to provide the same availability that maybe previously in your physical data centers has been out of your reach from a financial standpoint.
Well, I have to add also that security is another important aspect that is often overlooked by organization. We need to create an eye gap between the production and the R infrastructure. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to create this kind of eye gap in a on-premises infrastructure, even if it's distributed network are designed to simplify communication between different data centers. So the viruses and cyber attacks like ransomware can easily spread across the entire organization, while using DR in the cloud helps to separate environments, and you use different mechanisms to replicate data, to encrypt data, and so on. So maybe this is another important key element when you need to take a decision about cloud.
Certainly a great point around the security. Certainly we've seen an increase from a cyber attack perspective. It's top of mind for most IT leaders that I speak to. And another sort of area that I'd like to explore with you both is the fact that around the data and the applications, because if you can provide insight into what you think an IT leader needs to do to ensure their data and their applications are actually cloud ready, and perhaps talk about any sort of key pitfalls that they should avoid as well.
Yeah, so I mean, from a pitfalls perspective, the biggest challenge traditionally with cloud and the biggest objection that we've always heard from organizations is around compliance and regulation. But I think there's been a large focus on that from most cloud providers. You've got government clouds out there now and things like that to enable those sorts of users who have heavy compliance to meet, to still utilize the clouds and gain the benefits that cloud delivers essentially. So that's one of the key pitfalls, making sure that whatever you're moving, there's not a regulation against you moving that out there, for example. From a preparation perspective, what do you need to do? Largely, most of the good tools out there are going to do the heavy lifting for you. Typically workloads are already virtualized, so all you're doing is moving it to a different virtualized platform essentially, and that whole process is typically managed by the solution that you choose to deliver that. That being said, it is very, very key to understand your application dependencies. For example, if you have some applications protected but not others, but they're dependent on each other, that's not going to work very well. So understanding that is key. And then lastly, I'd say orchestration and automation. It's all very well, moving data to another site, but can you get it up and running quickly with minimal impact to your end users?
Yeah, and last point I would add is about data sovereignty here. I mean, I live in Europe, and for us, it's an important part of the story all the time. So we have different countries with different regulations. Sometimes some of them need to access data if necessary for for the law or whatever, and they have to. And all enterprises have to keep their data locally. So we usually think about the cloud as major providers like AWS, Azure, or GCP, but actually there are a lot of local providers that can give you a very good cloud experience, especially with the disaster recovery as a service, so VMware-based services, and enterprises could remove all the regulatory barrier by using a service provider. So there are several options regarding the DR on the cloud, especially if you think about local countries and economies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, and as we think about companies, and most companies are looking at modernizing their IT operations, and so I guess a question comes up as to whether or not moving disaster recovery to the cloud is a good place to start.
Well, from my point of view, so modernizing IT operation also means following best practices, and as we said earlier in this webinar, so doing more tests for compliance, and with the cloud you can change the pace, save money for this kind of testing. You can also cloud DR for migrations, for example. Maybe this is a wishful thinking, but actually it could be a great idea because you can move easily data from your on-premises data center to the cloud and back, depending on several reasons. I mean, you can build a QA environment very quickly by using the same technology and with the same kind of savings also. So why not using the same tool to replicate your data across several environments, or orchestrate operations that are necessary to build a lift and shift kind of migrations. So I think that there is more than just cloud DR if you adopt a cloud DR technology. I mean, maybe it's a little bit thought-provoking in this case, but actually I think it could be a base for a nice discussion with a lot of users.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to most organizations these days, there is some form of cloud strategy, and they're at various different stages of proceeding that and I guess going down that route. But my view is this should be very much a crawl, walk, run process. You don't want to just suddenly throw everything into the cloud because it might not work for you. You might not understand it fully. It's definitely something that you should build up to essentially. And DR is perfect as that first step, dipping your toe in the water, as it will, because realistically it doesn't require any architecture changes, but yet you're able to utilize the cloud for your target side, and you get an instant cost saving off the back of that because you can shut down a physical data center somewhere else. So really, it's a win-win from that scenario.
Right, we'll talk more about the cost benefits in a moment, but those are great points. Just so that we sort of, thinking about the audience that we have here today, we have a mixture of both mid-sized and large organizations that are listening in. And so my question to both of you is that, are the needs when you're moving DR to the cloud different based on, say, the size of the company?
Well, I think it's very important to think about mid and large size organizations, and they have different needs when it comes to the cloud. I mean, a mid-size organization usually needs simple, easy to manage, cost-conscious solutions. Okay, so they while large size organization usually need consistent experience, predictable solutions. That can be also delivered globally. I mean, they are much larger than a mid-sized organization, and of course they need something that can cover a larger number of use cases. So if you think in this way, a DR platform could be a solution for data protection, data mobility, both in mid and large size organization. And I would add to that no matter the size of the IT organization, all our clients, for example, are now looking to save money. And this is not only because of COVID, but actually there are several reasons to that. And they want to be more responsive. They want to respond quicker to new business needs. So it's efficiency and speed of interaction. This is common across all types of organizations, as I said. So that's a little bit of it. So mid organization, more cost sensitive, large organization, more towards efficiency and consistent, but efficiency and speed of reaction for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there, Enrico. Having said that, I think regardless of the size of the organizations, there's things they can benefit from utilizing cloud DR, and ultimately their end outcomes are the same, minimizing data loss and impact to their end users.
Yeah, both of you have touched on about the cost aspect of it, and so let's sort of switch to the second sort of key topic or the key sort of thoughts that we mentioned in the agenda earlier around how does sort of cloud-based DR save an organization money. So let's delve a little bit more into that, as well as also perhaps some of the different cloud options that are available to an organization. So basically, sort of two parts to this question. One is, what are the different cloud models that are available to organizations today? And then, then it begs the question as to why should an organization choose one over the other?
So I guess if I start with the cloud models, you've got the traditional private cloud, which is physical environment on site, albeit with virtualization on top, but delivered in a private data center essentially. You then have the public cloud option, which is your bigger, larger players who we all know out there, who are able to offer that OpEx approach. Those are the two big cloud models. But then you have different ways of how do I utilize cloud. So disaster recovery as a service is obviously a key one for looking to achieve DR, but not manage it yourself maybe, or something along those lines. And that's something that we've seen a very large uptake on from a Zerto perspective. You've also got in-cloud BCDR, where you're utilizing a cloud provider, public cloud or private cloud, and you're doing disaster recovery within there. And then you've got multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, where you could be utilizing a mixture of private cloud, public cloud, different public clouds. You've got a lot of flexibility there, and actually that's probably the one that we see a lot of people utilizing as well.
Yeah, if I can add something here, I mean, back to the discussion around small and medium and large organizations. I mean, disaster recovery as a service is sure the option that most of the mid-sized organizations choose usually, because of the cost, because of the skill needed to manage the solution. while larger organizations prefer to keep control over the entire stack. So maybe they use the cloud as a platform, but actually they keep all the tools under their direct control. So it's a little bit different. So the two models are different, but actually the results are very similar, and they can fit in what we have seen a few minutes ago. Also, local service providers. So if we look at the market, I mean, looking more locally to enterprises where they live and what they do. So local providers are usually chosen by this smaller organization, while larger organizations are quickly moving to a multi-cloud approach, and usually with larger providers. So that can operate at the country level at least, but actually in multi-country, multi-region kind of approach. So these are, you know, all the peculiarities of this market. So not just one approach. Usually the approach chosen by the organization depends on the size, on the type of organization, and the different type of approaches depend on the need for flexibility or cost savings or even simplicity of the service.
All right, and there's also one question that pops up a lot is, you know, when you think about and you look at DR in the cloud and the different cloud models, do organizations actually have to pay for dedicated cloud space?
Well, it depends. I mean, I know this is the classic answer that the analyst gives, but the reality is that there are several options, and some of the option is that you pay just for the dedicated storage space. In other option, you can have a configured system, so you pay a little bit more because you already have all your instances ready to run, or just a bunch of instances. It really depends if you're looking at you know, disaster recovery, your RTO, your RPO, your you know, if you're looking at business continuity. So there are several nuances here, but actually you can really start with a cheap option, which is just the cloud storage. And now that many vendors support object storage, and object storage is notoriously very inexpensive, maybe lower than file or block storage, but actually very effective from this point of view. So you can start with a very inexpensive storage option.
Great. And now there are obviously a lot of options to choose from. So maybe what we could do is just talk about the process. What kind of process should an organization go through, you know, to decide if in fact, you know, moving DR to the cloud would reduce costs?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, one of the things I see when I talk to organizations doing this is having a appropriate process in how you make that decision is really key to ultimately coming to the right conclusion. Part of that is being very clear on what your goals are, what are you trying to achieve, you know, and that obviously doesn't necessarily need to be cloud specific. It's what are the outcomes you're after. And then once you've done that, obviously understanding your existing cost base, you know, what are we paying right now to deliver something similar? Maybe you're not delivering something similar, but what are you paying to deliver what you have today from a DR, BCDR perspective? Once you've understood that and you understand what your goals are, that sets you in a good place to obviously then start looking at you know, where can you save money, but also where can you achieve the outcomes that you're looking for most effectively.
So if I can add something here, I mean, we have you know, we are all experiencing globally this COVID thing, and it changed everything. It changed a lot of dynamics. I mean, first of all, if you didn't have a DR plan in place before, now you are thinking that it's time to have a DR plan. You know, you now understand that in a major crisis, your business could stop just because sometimes you can't access your data center, for example. So if something goes wrong and you can't access your data center, we in Italy had a couple of months of lockdown, and nobody was able to go to the office or to the data center. This is, it can create a major disruption. Even if a server breaks, you can do anything. You can do to your office. So why don't having something on the cloud that can replace these servers and give the service to your users? This was important this moment, and a lot of enterprises understood this in Europe and probably also in the US. So how many days can you stay without providing IT services today? This is a question that everybody should ask to, the business owner. And I think that nobody can afford to have days of stop in this moment. What do you think?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, in the end, if you already had a DR plan in place, so the same concept apply to the cloud. If you didn't, it's time to have it, I think. That's it.
So now maybe what we should do is take a look at what cost areas should organizations look at in the decision-making process.
Cool. I'll take that one first. There's obviously direct and indirect costs here. You've got your usual direct costs around infrastructure, facilities around that. So your infrastructure is including things like your network and your hardware and things like that. You've then got your facilities where you're talking about power, aircon, management, where you've got your IT teams. What does it take to currently keep the lights on there? Those are all things that should be looking at from a direct standpoint. You also have your indirect savings when you look at things like what your current RPOs are that you can deliver and RTOs, and what the impact to the business is if you are on those versus maybe a different solution that offers you much better RPOs and RTOs. What's the cost of the business in those scenarios? And that isn't something that should be overlooked in that decision process. If we look at some of Zerto's customers, for example, McKesson have been able to reduce their cost by 5 times by adopting a DR in the public cloud. And likewise, BJ's were able to save 800K over 3 years by just eliminating their secondary site and utilizing the public cloud. So considerable savings from that standpoint.
So that certainly is considerable savings, indeed it is. So as we wrap up this conversation, let's start by summarizing the technical reasons organizations should move to cloud-based DR. Maybe Enrico, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. As we mentioned several times in this webinar, I think flexibility is the first point. I mean, you want to be more flexible than in the past. You want to respond a quicker response time, and then of course you want to save money and time around your infrastructure. This is something that everybody wants. So in general, I would summarize all of this with improved operations and TCO.
And what about some of the business reasons? Let's focus on the business reasons organizations should move to cloud-based DR. What would you say from that?
Well, the first important reason is availability and business continuity in every scenario. I mean, you can't afford to stop your organization, especially now with post-COVID. We discovered working from home for many organizations was not a thing. Now you're depending on IT services even more than in the past. So and of course you need to adapt quickly to new business requirements of any sort, compliance. So in this case, it's a little bit of focus on ROI instead of TCO. So more return on investment, very quick return on investment compared to traditional disaster recovery. And of course, as I mentioned it earlier, there are a lot of new opportunities that this kind of technology could open in the future. And again, we were talking about DR in the cloud as the first step, and actually data migrations and other nice thing that you can think about by leveraging this technology.
Great. And then, so Steve, maybe you could help us, and tell us a little bit about sort of what's next for our listeners, if they want to learn more about the next steps and considerations for moving their DR to the cloud.
Yeah, so my recommendation would be to have a look at the Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery in the Cloud Era white paper that we put together. There's a lot of information in here, overlaps with a lot of what we talked about today, just in a bit more detail. So I definitely recommend having a look at that.
That's great, Steve. And there is the URL at the bottom there, and it is a great paper, and we'll make sure in the fact that all listeners have access to this report as well. So with that, thank you for both of you for summarizing there, and thank you for your time today, Enrico and Steve, and sharing your insights and thoughts as we talking about moving DR to the cloud. And I hope those that are listening today found the information valuable. And yeah, so thank you, and please take a download of this paper and learn more. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Enrico.